Let me tell you how one ordinary night flipped my entire life upside down. This isn't a story I ever thought I'd be writing. Heck, if someone told me a year ago that I'd end up here, sharing my humiliation with strangers on the internet, I'd have laughed them off. But life has a twisted sense of humor, and here I am, a man trying to make sense of the wreckage. That night started innocently enough. Sheila, my wife of 9 years, said she had dinner plans with her coworkers. Nothing unusual about that. She worked in marketing, and networking events were a regular part of her life. I was used to her heading out dressed to impress, heels clicking on the floor as she breezed out the door. But this time something felt off. It wasn't just the way she avoided my eyes when I asked when she'd be home. It was the little details that kept nagging at me. She'd spent hours getting ready, more effort than usual. A new perfume, something sharp and unfamiliar, lingered in the air as she left. Her laughter when I made a joke at the door felt hollow, forced, as though her mind was already somewhere else. Still, I didn't say anything. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. After all, what's a marriage without trust? An hour later, I was sitting on the couch, aimlessly flipping through channels, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a buddy of mine, Eric. "Hey man, thought you weren't a bar guy anymore. Just saw someone who looks like Sheila at O'Malley's. Looked like she was with some dude. Weird. Huh." My stomach dropped. O'Malley's? That was the bar downtown, nowhere near the restaurant district. My hands trembled as I typed back a casual, "You sure it was her?" But before I even got a reply, I was already grabbing my jacket. Something told me I didn't want to wait for confirmation. I had to see for myself. The drive to O'Malley's felt like it took hours, though it was only 15 minutes. My heart pounded against my ribs as I parked and stepped out of the car. The neon lights of the bar flickered in the darkness, casting an eerie glow on the pavement. Inside, the place was buzzing. Groups of people laughed loudly over drinks, couples huddled in intimate corners, and the smell of spilled beer hung thick in the air. I scanned the room, hoping, praying, that Eric had been mistaken. But then I saw her. Sheila, my Sheila, sitting in a booth toward the back, dressed in that green blouse I had complimented earlier. Across from her was a man, someone I didn't recognize. He was leaning in close, speaking in low tones, his hand resting casually on hers. And she wasn't pulling away. Instead, she was smiling. That warm, genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. Felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For a moment, I just stood there, rooted to the spot, watching the woman I thought I knew betray me so casually. When I finally snapped out of it, I wasn't thinking straight. I should have turned around and left, but instead, I walked toward their table. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of my crumbling marriage was bearing down on me. Neither of them noticed me at first. They were too absorbed in each other, laughing like teenagers on a first date. But then Sheila glanced up, and our eyes met. Her smile disappeared instantly, replaced by a look of pure shock. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, frozen and unsure whether to run or fight. The man, let's call him Mr. Smug, didn't even flinch. In fact, he looked me up and down, then smirked, as if daring me to do something about it. That smirk lit a fire in me, but I kept my cool. Barely. "Sheila," I said, my voice low but steady. "Mind introducing me to your friend?" She stammered something incoherent, her cheeks flushing with guilt. Mr. Smug just leaned back, looking completely unbothered. He even had the audacity to take a sip of his drink, as if this was all a game to him. I didn't give her a chance to explain. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my wedding ring. I slid it off my finger, holding it in my palm for a moment. The weight of it felt heavier than ever. Then, I closed my fist around it and held it out to her. "This is yours now," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've made it clear it doesn't mean anything to you." Sheila's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stick around to see them fall. I turned and walked out of the bar, my legs shaky but my head held high. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me. Betrayal, anger, sadness, and most of all, disbelief. How had it come to this? As I got into my car, I realized one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sheila had made her choice, but the consequences? Those were going to be mine to decide. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wasn't even sure how I managed to make it back without crashing. My mind raced with questions, each one hitting harder than the last. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time? Or had I been blind for months, years even? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the anger had settled into a cold, hard knot in my chest. The house, our home, looked the same as it always did, peaceful, ordinary. But now it felt like a lie, just like everything else. I sat there in the car for a while, staring at the front door, trying to summon the strength to go inside. Eventually, I did. I had to. The silence in the house was deafening. Sheila wasn't home yet, of course. She was probably still at the bar, scrambling to come up with an excuse, a way to twist this into something less damning. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I walked to the kitchen. Instead, I poured myself a drink, whiskey, straight, and sank into the chair at the dining table. As I stared at the empty seat across from me, memories of Sheila flooded my mind. I thought about the time we bought this table, how we'd argued over whether to get wood or glass. I thought about the countless meals we'd shared here, the laughter, the quiet moments when life felt solid and real. And now all of it felt like a cruel joke. My phone buzzed on the table, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Sheila. "I'm so sorry. Can we please talk? I can explain everything." Explain? How could she possibly explain what I had seen with my own eyes? But even as I thought that, I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe there was a reason, some context I didn't understand. Maybe, just maybe, I was jumping to conclusions. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't reply. Instead, I finished my drink and headed to bed, though sleep was the last thing on my mind. Lying there in the dark, I replayed the scene at the bar over and over, analyzing every detail, every expression. The way Sheila had looked at him, the way she hadn't looked at me. It wasn't just a mistake. It was something more, something deliberate. The next morning, Sheila came home. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, hesitant and soft, as though she was afraid to wake me. But I was already awake, sitting in the living room, waiting. When she finally walked in, she froze. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her makeup was smudged. She looked like she hadn't slept at all, which was a small comfort. At least I wasn't the only one suffering. "James," she began, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Go ahead." She sat down, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, finally, she blurted out, "It wasn't what it looked like." I almost laughed. That was the oldest line in the book. Wasn't it? Really? Because it looked a hell of a lot like you were on a date with another man. She flinched at my words, but I didn't let up. "Who is he, Sheila? How long has this been going on?" "It's not like that," she said quickly. "He's just a friend. We were talking about work stuff." "Work stuff," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You don't hold hands with your coworkers while talking about spreadsheets." Her face turned a deeper shade of red. "It was a mistake, okay? I had too much to drink, and things got out of hand." I stared at her, trying to decide if I believed her. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to cling to the idea that this was just a stupid lapse in judgment, something we could move past. But another part of me, the part that had seen the way she smiled at him, knew better. "Do you think I'm an idiot, Sheila?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. "Because that's how you're treating me right now. Like I'm too stupid to see what's right in front of my face." She didn't respond. Instead, she looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. That simple gesture made my blood boil. How dare she wear that ring after what she'd done? How dare she pretend to be the woman I thought I married? I want the truth, I said finally. All of it. Right now. She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she was going to stick to her story. But then, with a deep sigh, she said, "Okay, I'll tell you everything." What she told me next would change everything. It was worse than I'd imagined. Worse than I was prepared to handle. Sheila's face twisted with guilt, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "His name is Mark. He's a client of mine, and we've been seeing each other for a while." Her words hit me like a wrecking ball, shattering what little hope I had left. A while. Not a mistake. Not a one-time lapse in judgment. This was planned. Deliberate. Ongoing. "How long is a while, Sheila?" I asked, my voice calm but loaded with menace. I didn't want vague answers or half-truths. I wanted the whole, ugly reality, no matter how much it hurt. She hesitated, her lips trembling as she avoided my gaze. 6 months, she admitted. 6 months. Half a year. Half a year of lies, of betrayal, of looking me in the eye every day and pretending everything was fine. My fists clenched involuntarily, and I had to take a deep breath to stop myself from exploding. 6 months, I repeated, letting the words sink in. "So every time you told me you were working late, every time you went out with friends, you were really with him?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this, James. I swear. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Didn't mean for it to go this far?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "You've been cheating on me for 6 months. Sheila, that's not something that just happens. You made a choice, a conscious decision, to betray me over and over again." She flinched at my words, but I wasn't done. "What about us, Sheila? What about the life we built together? Did any of it mean anything to you?" "Of course it did," she cried, finally meeting my eyes. "I love you, James. I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You have a funny way of showing it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was deafening, filled with all the words that neither of us knew how to say. Finally, I broke it. "Why?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Why him? What does he have that I don't?" She hesitated again, as though weighing how much truth she could afford to tell. "It wasn't about you," she said eventually. "Mark. He made me feel alive again. He made me feel wanted." "Wanted?" I echoed, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "And what about me, Sheila? Have I not spent the last 9 years making you feel wanted? Have I not loved you, supported you, given you everything I had?" "You have," she said quickly. "You've been a wonderful husband, James. But somewhere along the way we stopped connecting. We stopped being us." Her words cut deeper than I cared to admit. Part of me wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that it wasn't true. But another part of me, an ugly, desperate part, wondered if maybe she was right. Had we drifted apart without even realizing it? Had I missed the signs? But no, this wasn't my fault. Whatever problems we had, Sheila had chosen to solve them by running into someone else's arms. That was on her, not me. "So what now?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Are you leaving me for him?" Her eyes widened in shock, as though the thought had never occurred to her. "No," she said quickly. "I don't want to leave you, James. I want to fix this. I want us to be okay." I let out a bitter laugh. "You want us to be okay? After what you've done? Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds?" "I'll do anything," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll cut things off with Mark. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. Just, please don't give up on us." Her desperation might have moved me once, but now it only made me angrier. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. And as much as I wanted to believe that we could fix this, I couldn't shake the image of her with him, laughing and smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. "I don't know if there's an us left to save," I said finally. "But I'll tell you one thing. I'm not going to make this easy for you." Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing quietly. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but emptiness. Then I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. Upstairs, I locked the bedroom door behind me and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly lost. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. My life would never be the same again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, images of Sheila and her lover played on an endless loop in my mind. The sound of her laugh, the way her hand lingered on his, the look in her eyes. All of it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. By the time the sun came up, I was still lying there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The bed felt cold and unfamiliar, as if the foundation of everything I thought I knew had shifted beneath me. Downstairs, I heard Sheila moving around. She was trying to be quiet, probably afraid I'd come storming down to confront her again. I wasn't in the mood for another argument, but I knew we couldn't avoid it forever. Not when there was so much left unsaid. When I finally dragged myself out of bed and headed downstairs, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up when she heard me, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she broke the silence. "Did you sleep?" she asked, her voice tentative. "No," I replied bluntly, grabbing a mug and pouring myself some coffee. I didn't bother asking if she had. Her red, swollen eyes told me everything I needed to know. We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "So, what's the plan, Sheila?" I asked, setting my mug down with a little more force than necessary. "How exactly do you think we're supposed to move forward from this?" She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I've already texted Mark," she said quietly. "I told him it's over, that I can't see him again." "Congratulations," I said dryly. "I'm sure he's heartbroken." She flinched at my sarcasm but didn't respond. Instead, she took a shaky breath and said, "I meant what I said last night, James. I want to fix this. I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if I have to." Her words sounded sincere, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. "And what about me, Sheila?" I asked, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out that the person you trusted most has been lying to you for months? To know that while I was here, holding this marriage together, you were out with someone else?" Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I didn't stop. "You say you want to fix this, but how am I supposed to believe you? How do I know this won't happen again?" "You don't," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "All I can do is prove to you that I'm committed to making this work. But I need you to give me a chance, James. Please." Her desperation was hard to ignore, but so was the anger and betrayal festering inside me. I didn't know if I could give her the chance she was asking for. Not when the trust between us had been shattered into a million pieces. "I don't have an answer for you right now," I said finally, my tone cold. "I need time to figure out what I want." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness." I didn't respond. Instead, I got up from the table and walked out the door, needing space to clear my head. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. Eventually, I ended up at Eric's house. He was the only person I could think of who might understand what I was going through. When I told him what had happened, he didn't say much, just handed me a beer and let me vent. "Sheila screwed up, man," he said after I finished telling him everything. "But you need to think long and hard about what you want. If you're going to forgive her, it has to be because you believe she's worth it, not because you're afraid of starting over." His words hit me harder than I expected. Was Sheila worth it? Could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I ever trust her again? Or was this the end of the road for us? By the time I left Eric's house, I still didn't have any answers. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it soon. When I got home that evening, Sheila was waiting for me in the living room. She looked like she'd been crying all day, but I didn't have the energy to feel sorry for her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She nodded, sitting up straighter. "Okay, I'm listening. I've thought about what you said," I began, choosing my words carefully. "And I've decided that I can't make any decisions until I know the whole truth." Sheila's brow furrowed in confusion. "The whole truth? What do you mean?" "I mean, I want everything, Sheila," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "Every detail, every lie, every moment you spent with him. I want to know exactly what I'm forgiving or walking away from." Her face paled, and for a moment I thought she might refuse. But then she nodded slowly, her voice trembling as she said, "Okay, I'll tell you everything." What followed was a confession that left me more shattered than I ever thought possible. Sheila sat across from me, her hands trembling as she clasped them tightly in her lap. For a moment, she just stared at the floor, like she was trying to summon the courage to say the words that would destroy me even further. I leaned back in the chair, my arms crossed, waiting. If she was going to come clean, I wasn't going to let her sugarcoat it. "Start from the beginning," I said, my tone sharp and unwavering. "When did this thing with Mark start? And don't leave anything out." She took a shaky breath, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "It started at a client dinner about 6 months ago. I didn't plan for anything to happen, James. I swear. We were just talking, and he made me feel special, like I was the most important person in the room." I scoffed, shaking my head. "So what? I don't make you feel special? Is that your excuse?" Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that. You do make me feel special. But it was different with him. He said all the right things and She paused, her voice breaking. "I got caught up in it." "Caught up in it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean you willingly stepped into it? Let's not pretend this was some accidental slip. Sheila, you made a choice." She nodded, her tears falling faster now. "You're right. I did. And I hate myself for it." I didn't respond. Couldn't. The image of her sitting across from Mark, laughing and smiling like I didn't exist, was still too fresh in my mind. But I wasn't done digging. If she was going to confess, I wanted it all. "So what happened next?" I asked coldly. "How did it go from a client dinner to whatever this was?" She wiped her tears and took another deep breath. "After that dinner, he started texting me. At first, it was about work, project updates, client feedback, that kind of thing. But then the messages became personal. He'd compliment me, ask about my day, make little jokes to cheer me up. I knew it was crossing a line, but I didn't stop him." "Of course you didn't," I said bitterly. "Why would you? You were enjoying the attention." She didn't deny it. Instead, she continued, her voice trembling. "About a month later, we had another client meeting, this time at his office. After the meeting, he asked me to stay and talk. He said he could tell I wasn't happy and that I deserved better. And I believed him. I clenched my fists, the anger boiling inside me. "So he told you what you wanted to hear, and you fell for it. What happened after that? Did you sleep with him?" Sheila flinched at the directness of my question, but she didn't look away. "Not at first," she said quietly. "It started with small things. A kiss in his office, a late-night phone call. It escalated slowly, James. But yes, eventually Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't say it. I already know." The room fell silent, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in around me. But I wasn't finished. "Where did it happen?" I asked, my voice icy. "Was it always at his office? Or did you bring him here into our home?" Her eyes widened in horror, and she shook her head vehemently. "No, I would never do that, James. I swear. It was always at his place or hotels." The word hotels sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over me. I could picture it all too clearly. Sheila, sneaking off to some cheap motel, laughing and smiling as she cheated on me. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. And the bar last night? I pressed. Was that your usual meeting spot? Or was it just bad luck that I walked in? She hesitated, and I could tell she was debating how much to reveal. We've been there a few times before, she admitted finally. But last night was supposed to be the last time. I swear, James, I was going to end it. I was ready to tell him it was over. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You expect me to believe that? That the one time I happened to walk in, you were magically about to come clean? Do you think I'm stupid, Sheila? No, I don't, she cried, her voice breaking. I know how it sounds, but it's the truth. I was going to tell him I couldn't do it anymore. That I wanted to fix things with you. Her words sounded hollow, and I couldn't tell if she was lying or just desperate to save face. Either way, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Do you love him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze, her eyes widening in shock. No, she said quickly. I don't love him. It was never about love, James. It was just a distraction, a stupid, selfish mistake. Her answer didn't bring me any comfort. In fact, it made it worse. If it wasn't about love, then what was it? Boredom? Curiosity? The thrill of sneaking around behind my back? I stood up abruptly, unable to sit there any longer. I need some air, I muttered, heading for the door. James, wait, Sheila called after me, her voice filled with panic. Please don't go. We can talk more. We can figure this out. But I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. I walked out the door and into the cool evening air, my mind racing. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. I drove aimlessly through the city, the streetlights blurring together as my thoughts spiraled. Sheila's words replayed in my mind. Every excuse, every justification, every tearful plea. None of it made sense. How could the woman I loved, the woman I built my life with, do something so cruel? I pulled into an empty parking lot, killing the engine and sitting in the silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel as if letting go would cause me to unravel completely. I needed answers, clarity, something to make sense of this mess. But the more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. Was I partly to blame? Had I been neglecting her without realizing it? Or was this simply who Sheila had become? A stranger hiding behind the face of the woman I married? The thought made my stomach churn. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the dark sky above. Somewhere, in one of those countless windows, Sheila was probably still sitting at home, wondering if I'd come back. Part of me wanted to walk through that door and demand more answers, to make her feel the pain she'd inflicted on me. But another part of me, the exhausted, broken part, just wanted to disappear. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Eric's name stared back at me, but I hesitated. I had already burdened him enough, and besides, what could he say that would make this better? This was my mess to figure out. Alone. Taking a deep breath, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would start looking into lawyers. It wasn't a decision I'd made lightly, but I couldn't keep living in this limbo. Sheila might have been ready to fix things, but I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her or trust her again. For now, though, I just needed to get through the night. When I finally walked back into the house, the clock on the wall showed it was just past midnight. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy and suffocating. Sheila was sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. She didn't look up when I entered, but I could tell she'd been crying. Again. James, she said softly, her voice cracking as she finally looked up. Her eyes were red, her face pale. I didn't know if you were coming back. I ignored her and walked past her toward the kitchen. I needed water or maybe just something to do with my hands. I poured a glass, the sound of the faucet filling the space between us, before turning to face her. You're lucky I came back, I said coldly, leaning against the counter. Because right now, I don't see much of a reason to stay. Her face crumpled, and she moved to stand, taking a cautious step toward me. Please, James, don't say that. We've been through so much together. Don't let this Don't let me ruin everything we've built. I put the glass down, the sound of it hitting the countertop sharper than I intended. Sheila, you didn't ruin it. You destroyed it. You took everything we built, everything I trusted, and threw it away for what? For someone who doesn't even care about you. She froze at my words, her hands clenching into fists. That's not true, she said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. I made a mistake, James, but that doesn't mean I don't care about you. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door or burning dinner. What you did, Sheila, wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A choice you made over and over again for 6 months. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might finally stop arguing. But then she looked up at me, desperation etched into her face. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said. But I love you, James. I love us. And I'm begging you, please don't give up on me. The sincerity in her voice was almost enough to make me falter. Almost. But then I remembered the way she had looked at Mark, the way she had laughed with him, as though I didn't exist. That image was burned into my memory, a constant reminder of her betrayal. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice quieter now. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Every time I see you, all I'll think about is him. Her face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. I'll do anything, she sobbed. Anything to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with. But that was the problem. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have done this to me. And as I stood there, watching her break down, I realized something. I didn't know who Sheila was anymore. Or maybe I never did. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her sobbing alone in the living room. I didn't have the energy to keep fighting. Not tonight. The next morning, the house felt emptier than ever. Sheila must have fallen asleep on the couch because when I came downstairs, I saw her curled up under a blanket, her face pale and tear-streaked. I paused for a moment, staring at her, wondering how we had gotten here. 9 years of marriage, countless memories, and now, this. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee in silence, trying to gather my thoughts. I had told myself I needed more time to make a decision, but deep down I already knew the answer. There was no coming back from this. The damage was too deep, the trust too shattered. Even if I forgave her, how could I ever believe her again? As I sat there, Sheila stirred and slowly woke up. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and she sat up quickly, brushing her hair out of her face. James, she said, her voice hoarse. Good morning. Morning, I replied curtly, not meeting her eyes. She hesitated, then got up and walked toward me. Can we talk? She asked, her voice trembling. I set my mug down and looked up at her. Yeah, we need to. She sat across from me, wringing her hands nervously. I know I've said this before, but I'm so sorry, James. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I'm begging you, please give me a chance to make things right. I'll do whatever it takes. Her words were earnest, but they felt hollow. I had heard them all before, and they didn't change the reality of what had happened. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. Sheila, I began, my voice calm but firm. I've spent the past day trying to figure out how we move forward from this. But the truth is, I don't think we can. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. No, James, don't say that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can… No. I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. We can't fix this, Sheila. You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. Every time you left the house, every time you said you were working late, you were lying to me. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? Her tears were flowing freely now, and she reached across the table to grab my hand. James, please. I know I've made horrible mistakes, but I love you. I love us. Don't throw everything away because of this. I pulled my hand back, shaking my head. You threw it away, Sheila. Not me. You made the choice to cheat. You made the choice to betray me. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the pain I had felt when I saw her with Mark, the lies she had told me for months, and the pity dissolved. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "I've already contacted a lawyer. I'll make sure this is as smooth as possible, but I can't do this anymore." Her sobs turned into cries of protest. "No, James. Please don't do this. I'll change. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm sorry." But it was too late. I had already made up my mind. I stood up from the table and walked to the door, grabbing my keys. Before I left, I turned back to her one last time. "I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for with him," I said, my voice cold. "But don't expect me to wait around while you figure it out." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving Sheila behind. That was the last time I saw her. The divorce process was messy, as these things usually are, but I stayed firm. I moved out, started fresh, and focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, but every day, I felt a little stronger. As for Sheila, I heard through mutual friends that things with Mark didn't work out. Apparently, he moved on to someone else not long after we split. I wish I could say I felt sorry for her, but the truth is, I don't. She made her choices, and she has to live with them. As for me, I've learned a lot from this experience about love, trust, and what I'm willing to tolerate in a relationship. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I'll never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. And that's it. That's my story. Thanks for reading, and if you've made it this far, I appreciate you. Life can be messy, but sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward. Epilogue. A new beginning. The divorce wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I felt myself getting stronger. Not because the pain disappeared overnight. It didn't. The first few months were brutal. It's hard to accept that everything you built, everything you trusted, was a lie. But over time, I realized something. Losing someone who never truly valued me wasn't a tragedy. It was freedom. I moved to a new city, took a different job, and finally started living the life I had put on hold for too long. I picked up old hobbies, the ones I had forgotten about while trying to be the perfect husband. I reconnected with friends, traveled, and most importantly, I learned to enjoy my own company again. One day, out of curiosity, I looked Sheila up. Not because I missed her, but because I wanted to see what became of her after she lost everything. As I expected, things hadn't worked out with Mark. He moved on to another woman, and Sheila was left picking up the pieces of the life she had thrown away. It didn't bring me joy to see her suffer, but it did bring me closure. I no longer felt anger toward her. I no longer wondered why she did what she did. The past was the past, and it no longer had power over me. A year after the divorce, I met someone kind, genuine, and nothing like Sheila. But the difference this time, I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I had already learned how to stand on my own. Looking back, I don't regret what happened. It broke me, yes, but it also rebuilt me into someone stronger. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. And so I did. And I never looked back.